often do you revert back to traditional parenting even though you're trying to lower demands and provide an accommodation approach to your PDA child or teen? So it happens all the time, and I wanted to give you a brief anecdote from this weekend with my husband to illustrate this. Okay, so this weekend, as you guys know, we have a new au pair, so he is adjusting to understanding how to interact with our kids. And usually I take Saturday mornings off to walk with one of my dearest friends in the town over and do some nervous system work. However, I was 1 minute into a meditation and I heard 2 blood-curdling screams, which I'm sure you guys are all aware of what that sounds like. So I went downstairs. My younger son had like a gushing bloody nose. There was a toileting accident. My other child was screaming. And I reacted and said, like, there are 2 adults here. How is this happening? Right? And then my husband got really frustrated, and he usually does not do this. And he said, I'm done. And he walked out the door to go onto the porch. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is happening? So I went into the bathroom. I helped my younger son. We cleaned up his bloody nose, etc. And then I talked to them about what had happened. And I had put pressure on my husband to get the younger one off the iPad because he had already watched a bunch in his room upstairs, and he's only 4.5, which is difficult because our older PDA child does not have screen time limits. So this is also a difficult sibling dynamic. So my husband reached his threshold, and what had happened was he was trying to incentivize the younger child to come down and sit at the table in order to drink a chocolate milk out of a cup instead of a sippy cup. And my PDA son was trying to negotiate for him and saying, why can't he just drink it out of a water bottle, etc. But my husband got frustrated and reverted to what happens to all of us in moments of like, I'm the adult. Why can't they just do what I'm asking? Why can't they just drink out of a cup at the table? Right? So we get stuck in this, our own nervous system reactivity, and we revert back to like, I'm the authority. Why can't they just do what I'm asking? Right? And it's hard to go back into your brain and access your own frontal lobe and say, my child has a nervous system disability. They're actually not able to respond to the way that I'm parenting them in this way. And so I had to de-escalate, and of course, like, I undermined what my husband was trying to do in order to get them their sippy cups. They ended up sitting at the table, having chocolate milk with their iPads. So I don't share this to blame my husband, because I have moments like this too, where I'm super stressed and activated, and at a certain point, my brain is just like, I'm the authority. Why can't you just do what I say? And then I come back to my baseline. So what I want to emphasize for you guys is not perfection, that you're constantly, always perfectly implementing this accommodation approach, but that you're defining it as your baseline to come back to rather than the reward, sanction, punishment, I'm the authority energy of more traditional parenting. So I wanted to share that anecdote before you guys, or while you guys asked questions for Coffee with Casey, and say hello, because I wasn't here last week because I was teaching the Progress with PDA workshop. All right, so let's see what people are saying. We have Punk Pixels who says, why can't we work like other families? This is always my first thought. On good days, I move past this and move on to my reality. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We all have these thoughts. And I think naming the thoughts, recognizing them without avoiding them and making ourselves bad because we have them, but also not attaching to them and coming back to the baseline can be incredibly helpful, but not making ourselves bad or guilty because we have those thoughts. Because honestly, of the hundreds of families I've worked with, and maybe it's just who I attract to my world, I've never had parents who didn't have moments where they had those thoughts. So I am here with you guys for a couple minutes before I go to my yoga class, and if you guys have any questions, I'm here to answer them. Last week was a huge week for me, so I wasn't here last week. Okay, so Melly has a question. Do your kids dress themselves? Any suggestions turning this into an internal motivation so kids want to do this herself? Okay, so yes and no. Okay, this is actually an interesting question because often I err on the side of, with both my children, not just my PDA child, and this is sometimes where I question myself because my younger 4.5-year-old is not PDA. But, I often brush his teeth for him, I get his clothes on for him, but last night he was like, Mama, I'm going to do it all myself. And he just had the internal motivation to do it. And when my PDA son was younger, I never saw what you're calling internal motivation. And I never would have trusted that he had it. But when he was 4.5, 5, 6, actually he had the internal motivation, but he could not access that motivation because he was operating so much from his survival brain and it was obscured by the threat response. And so I err on the side of accommodating him in order to lower the threat response so that he operates more out of his rational brain and heart space and not just his survival reactivity so that he can access that motivation. So now our baseline is my 8.5-year-old son does dress himself, brush his teeth, and do a lot of the things that he used to not do. However, it fluctuates, and I monitor this depending on his cumulative levels of stress. So, for example, on Fridays, I often brush his teeth for him. I even might bring a cup in and he'll spit into it because he has the cumulative nervous system activation over the course of a week of school, and then I'm more intensively accommodating at the end of the week to bring it down. Okay, so our baseline has changed, but I still use lowering the demands of putting on clothes or brushing teeth for him as a more intensive accommodation when I see that he needs it. And I view it as an accommodation. I don't view it as a lack of skill or motivation, right? And that's a mindset shift that we have to make. And it is counterintuitive because, like all the traditional child development parenting stuff will say, like, you need to teach your child to do these skills. However, the reframe I want to invite you into is our children want to access skills. They may already have the skills, but they're not able to employ them when their nervous system is so activated. Okay? Yeah, end of school transition is hard. Yes, it is. This is so validating. It's so freaking hard. It sure is. My son hasn't been able to access school in like 2 months. Today, the second to last day, he's going because it's a yes day. We're scared to begin unschooling, but it looks like it may be best. Well, I am sending you so much love and courage and support and witnessing for this next step in your journey. And I will say that from the hundreds of families that I've worked with, and my own journey included, unschooling can be very challenging in the sense that you're lending your nervous system and executive functioning to the recovery of your child's nervous system. But often when we do make that decision, you see the relationship dramatically change. You see the cumulative nervous system activation come down, and your child, and I want you to notice this over the months, improvement in accessing basic needs, improvement in the degree to which fight, flight, or freeze behavior is expressing, improvement in the amount of equalizing, and most importantly, improvement in the connection and trust with your child. And once that's established and you can see what's behind the threat response, then a lot of things open up for the future of you and your family. So I'm just sending you my blessings. I know it feels like such a harrowing trade-off because, it's like someone has to conceptualize their career around it, but trust your instincts. My kid is unschooled and doesn't get dressed until we're going out. If we are going out, I mostly have to choose the clothes for her and put them next to her. Then if she wants to go out, she does. Yeah, great. So you're scaffolding that. You're strewing possibilities, visual cues of options. That's great. Mine will dress herself when I'm not around. Yeah. Can structured breaks at school be perceived as demands even though she enjoys them? Child perseverates on the schedule and is frequently asking for breaks during school, missing out on academics. Okay, so any set routine, even a routine that has been collaboratively decided upon or chosen by the PDA or themselves, can ultimately become a perceived loss of autonomy or equality to the structure itself, which activates the threat response because the brain perceives it as threat. So yes, absolutely, the structured breaks can be perceived as a loss of autonomy, especially if they're externally imposed by the teacher. That doesn't mean they're not, it's better than no breaks. But the primary accommodations we want to think about are how can we imbue the educational setting with more autonomy? So like one example would be a child who has like a red card where they can just like show the red card when they need a break, right? And it can feel scary as a parent or even as a teacher because you're like, well, they're just going to use the red card all the time and never be in the classroom. But often what we find is that when we do give the child autonomy and let go of like whether or not they use the structured break or the card, if we truly give them autonomy, they're not going to use it at every moment of every day necessarily. So that's just a seed I'll plant with you. My 16-year-old PDA son does his morning and evening routine on his own now. Sometimes I have to help him pick out outfits. It's better. Other challenges now that he's a teen. Great. Thanks for sharing, Jennifer. Will my child dress themselves when they are an adult? I worry about this. Okay, so when I coach families, we work through a cost-benefit framework, and one of the things I encourage parents to really do is to tune in to whether the cost of accommodating or not accommodating is actually a cost in the moment, like we're either activating or accommodating the nervous system when we're choosing whether or not to like help them get dressed. If they need it and we choose not to, we're activating the nervous system, and that's a choice we're making. Parents often get stuck in the fear cost, the perceived cost of like 10 years down the road, right? So like, if you can let go of that fear cost, what would you decide right now without thinking about the future, right? So that's a seed I'll plant there because that's like an entire module in the paradigm shift. Okay. Any tips on brushing teeth? My 12-year-old has massive resistance to this and I have a hard time accepting this. We have tried so much. Okay, so normally how I view basic needs access, of which teeth brushing falls into the category of hygiene, right? So you have toileting, sleep, safety, eating, hygiene. So these are the basic needs in the sense of like, if you don't do them, right? Like if you never ever brush teeth, you can have impacted molars. If you don't get dental care, you can have infections, right? Like we need some hygiene to stay alive and healthy. And so that's how I define the basic needs categories. I look at basic needs as an indicator rather than necessarily the thing to focus on, right? So like often there's one sticky basic need for my son, it's eating. And cumulative nervous system activation impacts the degree to which they're resisting or controlling around that basic need. And so as counterintuitive as it feels, sometimes when we focus elsewhere on trust and accommodations, like putting their shoes on for them in the morning, right? We're accommodating and we're not having them build towards their threshold. That can help with teeth brushing. Okay, so like, I know that's a logic that like is hard to wrap your mind around, but remember, it's in accumulation. So it's not about whether or not they can put their shoes on, but if we are providing a lower demand in that moment, then they're not building towards this point where they like need to control and resist basic needs. Okay, so that's a reframe for you to think about. Eventually, it all turns into a demand in our house. We have so many routine charts that she requested herself that eventually just didn't feel right to her anymore. Yeah, so like one thing you can do, because some of these kids are drawn to like chore charts or even laminated schedules, we can just hold it super lightly. Like, absolutely, we can make this, we can laminate it, I can like be there witnessing you wanting to do it, but then also holding it lightly and just being like, it's totally fine. Like, you can do that if you want, you don't have to, we can set it aside for another week. Like, modeling for them that it's okay to have that perception of an internal demand and moving on, right? And they might return to it, which is a pattern I've certainly seen. Ideas for how to transition back into a school environment. Montessori. Initially and longer-term accommodations for once the novelty wears off. Okay, so the good thing about Montessori is that the design of the education itself is actually, compared to public education, more PDA friendly because it's including autonomy in the structure of how education is taught, right? Like, children have choices, they can go at different paces. Like, when I was looking for schools for my son, the two questions I asked were, A, does everybody have to do the same? Do all the kids have to do the same thing at the same time in the same way? And if the answer was yes, I was like, it's not going to work. So like even a progressive school like Waldorf, they were like, yeah, everybody's expected to do essentially the same thing at the same time. So with Montessori, hopefully it's a school where it's like mixed age classroom. They can be on different developmental and educational timelines, and they can have autonomy around what they're engaging in. Okay, so when we've worked with the Montessori school, I trained the teachers on PDA, of course, and we talked a lot about declarative language, and they read that book. We talked a lot about providing the autonomous decision of like opting out, right? So like earlier in this live, I talked about the red card. Like my son has a service dog, so like he is allowed to like move over to the service dog if he needs a break. Lots of co-regulation, right? And that can happen with another kid also, like the teacher's facilitating support if one kid is further ahead than my son with a particular activity, like they'll pair the kids together for that nervous system scaffolding. Hopefully it's a smaller classroom. Ours has 2 teachers with 13 kids, so that's like a lot more attention. They also completely understand PDA, which is like, took a lot of work on my part, but like knowing that and understanding cumulative nervous system activation and being in contact with the teachers on a daily basis of like, this is what's happening at home, this is what you might see at school. When they see things at school, we talk about it at home, etc. So like an openness and willingness to learn and curiosity and willingness to be in communication, I think is like the primary thing besides the autonomy, right? Like safe nervous system, perceived equality, and autonomy. And luckily, Montessori has some of that included. In terms of transitioning, so, this depends on whether or not the child feels ready and wants to go to school. So, my son tried out the Montessori and he was allowed to not choose school. So he felt a lot of autonomy in whether or not he went. And he went and he was like, yes, I want to try it. But I was always like, you know, if it's too much, like, we don't have to do this. If it's too much one day, you can stay home. So, and that was a big deal because we paid for the entire year of private school from our savings, like, not knowing if he was actually going to be able to do it. But I was like, we have to experiment, we have to try, and there's obviously no way I can have any type of career or business if I'm unschooling, which I was for a while. So, Allison, I know that that's not like super specific, but I hope it was helpful. All right. Oh, hey, Mom. How are you? Good to see you. All right, I'm going to answer one more question, and then I'm going to head to yoga. But I don't think... I sit here. Thank you. This is so encouraging and helpful. You're welcome. I make it for her, but I never hold on to it for the charts. That's awesome. Yeah. And then just like as a parent, like the next step, if you've already provided the accommodation of like allowing them to let go of the laminated chart or the chore chart, then it becomes internal work of like noticing our own attachment and activation around them dropping it. And like that's where we deepen of just like, okay, this is what they're doing. It's totally fine, right? Because what comes up for us is our own need for control and certainty and wanting things to be different than they are. And so like the next step I would say is just like noticing and naming that happening within yourself. Okay, so thank you. Oh, good, Allison. Thank you for being here. I hope it was helpful. I'm headed to yoga to sweat out my demons, and I will see you guys here next week. All right, everybody. Bye.